Alright, today we're gonna continue on what we were talking about yesterday. Um, Edge angles for performance, what I prefer, and even though I'm not a big fan of micro bevels, I've got this down to a point where the edge angle is too steep and it takes too much damage when I use it. I don't want it to roll every day from use. It's 1095. So instead of going back and sharpening even more steel off of something that's quite used already, Lansky turn box here. Not sure how easy this is going to be while I'm filming it, but I know that this is sharpened at about 18 degrees per side. I'm just going to make a couple passes down. And this is just putting a micro bevel on it. So we have our edge bevel. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it real well. That really fine light line across the apex right there is my micro bevel now. So even though, like I said, I'm not a big fan of them, I'm going to try it out today and see if this does any better for me. If it doesn't, maybe I'll just widen it up a little bit. But I am going to try it. I'll see how it does. Definitely get back to you about it. Now, what we were talking about yesterday is edge performance. This is new. Unlike my other one that was 23 thousandths behind the edge, this one is 19 thousandths behind the edge. So I'm gonna guess it'll cut a fair bit better. The other one didn't cut bad though on its own, and this one cuts pretty good. You know, I know I'll definitely be happy with it. What I did touch on a little bit previously is this D2 Gonzo is only 18 thousandths behind the edge. The blade stock is not very thick, but it does make a rather fast wedge. And because of that, it cuts, I mean, don't get me wrong, it does still cut okay. It just takes a little more force than I think it should take for something that's 18 thousandths behind the edge. And I say that because something like this PM2 that's 20 thousandths behind the edge goes through the cardboard easier. Than this blade that isn't as tall. And as far as I can tell, it's just because this makes a faster wedge. That way it creates more resistance when you're trying to cut through the cardboard. Instead of this, even though it's a little thicker behind the edge, it takes a longer time to make the same wedge. I have to measure my other ones. I enjoy using this pair of 3. It does measure out at 18 thousandths behind the edge. I'm not sure if that's normal for pair of 3s. Prior to today, it was the first time I ever measured one. I do enjoy using this. It does cut very nice. This is one I've heard talked about a lot. The Mass Drop Ferrum Forge Falcon. For a small knife, the blade stock is rather thick. However, mine measures 17 thousandths behind the edge. I've never found this to be something that does not cut well. I mean, goes super easy through the cardboard. Now, lower edge angles. Even if you don't understand why you like them, I'm sure that all of you have one or two knives. It might not even be your favorite knife. We'll use an Opinel, for example. If you've ever cut with an Opinel, you know that they cut super easy. I mean, takes not very much force at all to just go right through that cardboard, or anything else for that matter. It isn't necessarily because it has thin blade stock. This number 9 is 4 thousandths behind the edge. Now, the thinner your knife blade is behind the edge, and it's also relative to blade thickness. You know, there's a lot more involved to it. The total blade geometry. How tall is it? How wide is it? How fast does it make a wedge? How thin is it behind the edge? What's your edge angle set at? I mean, this looks like it has almost no edge on it. And this I measured out when I did it at 15 degrees per side. So this cuts awesome. Definitely not my favorite knife, but it cuts great. Just like when I was trying to test the 12C27 version of this, it cut way further than it was supposed to, because even when the edge started to get dull, this is 3 thousandths behind the edge. So even being pretty dull, this will still cut cardboard. I'm sure it would still cut a lot of other things also, even being dull. I mean, 3 thousandths is thin. You know, if any of you have ever had a feeler gauge set, pull out the 3 thousandths feeler gauge, and you can definitely tell how thin 3 thousandths is. It's super thin. The Factor Iconic, they don't make it anymore. One of my favorites. It's 18 thousandths behind the edge. Same thing. Cuts beautiful. So you got to think about way more than just how thick is your blade stock, how thin is it behind the edge. You know, the total cross section of what you're trying to push through any material is what you're really looking at. Kind of like if you were to cut this straight down the middle and then look at it head on, what it would look like. I mean, because essentially every knife is a wedge that you're trying to push through something. Like this FRN Chaparral. Super thin blade stock, but it's also 14 thousandths behind the edge. Love this knife. I mean, it cuts awesome. The Hollow Ground Cold Steel American Lawman. Mine measures 14 thousandths behind the edge. I also have the full flat ground version. Definitely two knives designed for totally different uses. That one's 23 thousandths behind the edge. This one's 14. Even with stock thickness like that, it's so easy to go through anything with it. I mean, this is one of my favorites to use right here. This little Tangram Amarillo, definitely not one of my favorites, kind of due to its size. I don't think there's anything wrong with the design necessarily, but it's got relatively thin blade stock. It's full flat ground, but it's also 12 thousandths behind the edge. And even though it's not one of my favorite knives to look at or carry, I use this quite a bit around the house just because it cuts so nice. This is one where what we talked about, what the total cross section of what you're trying to push through something actually looks like. I have two of these. They're awesome utility knives. Okay, this, even though this is 20 thousandths behind the edge, and there isn't a very high hollow grind on here, just the overall geometry of this blade, this cuts so nice through everything. You know, most of what I'm showing you today, they're not all necessarily my favorites. They're just ones that I know from using cut very nice. They're ones I reach for more often than others just because of how they perform. Steel Wheel D2 Modus. I also have the M390. I've never measured it. I don't know what it is. This one I've carried quite a lot. I use it a lot. Same thing. It's got a high grind on it. 17 thousandths behind the edge. Cuts so nice. Here's another one, Spyderco Domino. Decent sized blade stock. I love the blade shape on this. This is probably my favorite Spyderco, even in front of the Mannix. Excuse me. Alright, sorry guys. Alright, so as I was saying, the Domino, probably my favorite Spyderco. I don't know if they're all this way. Mine all the way measures 14 thousandths behind the edge. Okay? You can feel how thin it is. I mean, you can see how thin it is. This also just cuts absolutely beautiful. I don't carry it as much as I probably should, but it's definitely a nice knife. This Real Steel H6, it's another one. It is a thicker blade stock. It's 16 thousandths behind the edge. It's got a nice deep hollow grind to it. Same thing. Cuts really nice. So, what I'm getting at today is, even though you might not understand everything, like I said a couple minutes ago, you do know that you have certain knives you like to use because they cut easier than other ones do. And it is more complicated than how thick is the blade stock and how thin is it behind the edge, as this one illustrates. It's thinner blade stock than the Manix. Shorter, it's thinner behind the edge. This cuts through cardboard, I'm just using that as an example, with much less effort than this does. Because it's all the things you're factoring in for the blade that make the difference in how it cuts. Generally, for what I like on my knives, this would definitely be the upper extreme. This appears to have a micro bevel on it, but I do not know what angle Cold Steel actually sharpens these at to begin with, but that thin line on there where you can see I've sharpened it way out there by the apex, that's 15 degrees per side. So if I had to guess, the factory bevel on this, it's probably somewhere down in the 12 degrees per side. I personally like between about 15 and 18 degrees. But as you can see, like this for example, it's 16 thousandths behind the edge. That is 17 degrees per side. I measured this last night. This is also 17 degrees per side, but it's 20 thousandths behind the edge. And you can see how fast adding thickness behind the edge increases the width of the secondary bevel. Just like this little Enzo I have to send back to John Scarborough, who let me borrow it. This is 13 thousandths behind the edge, and it has a 17 degree per side edge on it. Super thin. Just like the others, this is one I think I'm going to have to get for myself also, just because it performs so nicely. So that's about it. I'm going to continue talking about this. Not necessarily the same things that I've already covered, but I think I'm going to put together a video to go more in detail about the total blade geometry and why some cut so much better than others do. So then, you know, we can factor in everything. How wide it is, how tall it is, how thin it is behind the edge, how much resistance when you're looking at it as a cross section, how much friction it causes. And I know I can't translate that really into hand pressure, but I'm going to work on something to better explain why some of these cut so much better than other ones do. You know, just like on the other end of the, you know, the drop point 551 version of this, you know, I do like the knife as a work knife, but even with a 17 degree per side edge on it, because it's thicker behind the edge, it makes it's got a flat grind on it. It's like pushing a wider wedge through cardboard. It definitely doesn't cut as nice as this. That's one, the 551, that I don't use to cut cardboard. I use that for harder stuff like zip ties and any other kind of stuff I have to do at work or around the house. But that's it for today. I rambled on enough. I touched on enough things but didn't explain them all. I understand that. I will come back to this very soon in the next few days. We'll cover it. We'll go over it some more. And I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.